Welcome to Equity in Motion, the podcast, where we dive into candid conversations with inspiring women and gender-diverse leaders who are breaking barriers in their fields. This podcast is brought to you by WAVE, Women's Advisory Voice of Edmonton, and our goal is to empower women and gender-diverse individuals to get involved in various sectors, including municipal government and civic engagement. I'm Erica Amer, and today we're stepping into the world of sports and fitness. In an industry often dominated by conventional standards of aesthetics and performance, how do women and gender-diverse individuals carve their own paths? Today, we're talking to leaders who are redefining fitness for everyone, embracing inclusivity, and overcoming challenges in a field where image and identity often take center stage. Let's get moving. So today, we're honored to have Tony Harris and Zita Dubé-Lockhart from Action Potential Fitness, located right here in Edmonton, Alberta. I would love to start with just some basic introductions of who you are, what is it you do, and anything you want listeners to know. So we can start with Tony.
Hi, I'm Tony. I use they, them pronouns. I identify as non-binary transmasculine, but haven't always, so have lived the experience of a woman in fitness as well. So I am the co-owner, one half of the co-ownership team of Action Potential Fitness. I am also the programs director for the Center for Trauma-Informed Fitness, which is a nonprofit that we also do outside of our for-profit business. I'm a certified CSAP trainer, and I have a background in all sorts of things, including dental assisting, of all things. But yeah, so I'm a trainer here, do the administrative, run the business in the back end. So that's my role.
Great, thank you. We're so excited to have someone with such a diverse background and diverse experiences. So, Zita, now over to you.
I feel like I need to say, way to sell yourself short, Tony. He's also our mechanical expert in the knowledge of the body, and just an all-round hugely powerful researcher and innovator in terms of equity in sports and fitness. So I'm honored to call them my business partner and to be co-owner of Action Potential Fitness. I currently serve as the executive director for the Center for Trauma-Informed Fitness, and so the other half of that team as well. We don't use a lot of hierarchical structure in our organizations, either one of them. We really try to be community-driven, and so we are more of facilitators and guides than, I guess, structured systemic leaders, if that makes sense. And in addition to that capacity, I am currently finishing my master's in counseling psychology, where I am specializing in body image related disorders, and specifically in eating disorders and disordered eating and exercise behavior. So currently doing my practicum with the Alberta Wellness Center for Eating Disorders, and have a pretty strong special interest in gender diversity and in neurodiversity and fat-bodied experiences and how that intersects with body image and movement. And I use she/they pronouns. I identify as agender, and have for as long as I remember. So that's me.
Thank you so much for those introductions. I hope that we can at least somewhat encapsulate part of your experience, because you guys are incredible. It seems just your dynamic already. I can't wait to delve into it some more. So how about we start with telling me more about your personal journeys into the sports and fitness world. How did you get started, and what inspired you to pursue this path? Zita, we can go back to you if that's okay.
Yeah, I'll jump in. So I was raised in a small rural community up north, near Peace River, and had actually always been an athlete. I really enjoyed sports. I enjoyed being in motion, I guess is a better way of putting it. Sometimes it being on a swing set for 6 or 7 hours at a time. Way back in the dark ages of the 1980s, we didn't talk a lot about how neurodivergence presents in girls and assigned girl at birth individuals. And so today I think we would look and go 7 hours on a swing set is a really long time to be swinging. But back then it just seemed like a child who really enjoyed being in motion. I was a proficient athlete, but I was never the best athlete. And I was really heavily conditioned to believe that part of the reason for that was that my body was not built for athletics and not built for sports. I was strong. I was powerful. Unfortunately, no one told me that there were sports that would favor being strong and powerful. And so I was too tall to be a gymnast, too tall to be a dancer, too broad for sports that were associated with my gender. And had honestly been gravitating more towards powerful sports anyway. Like that's, if I had had my way, I think I would have been much more interested in extending my hockey career beyond the very short stint that I had, or exploring things like rugby. But in a small town, your options are limited. And so when I reached university, by that point, I had had a couple of injuries playing volleyball. I had hoped to play volleyball at the varsity level, and an injury took that dream out of play very early. And I kind of fell out of movement in general, had a pretty significant illness that kind of set me back in my early 20s and led to bodies doing what bodies do. And when bodies don't move, and when mental health and spirits are low, bodies will find ways to conserve energy when and where they can. And that led to my body conserving energy in ways that really reinforced my belief that sport and fitness didn't belong to me. That my larger body made it inaccessible for me to revisit being physically active, and that was a part of my life that didn't exist until my son was born. And my son is my oldest. He is turning 15 in June, which is mind-boggling. And he is non-speaking autistic. And so an interesting thing happens when you're the parent of disabled children, especially when their needs are as high needs as Sam's are. I realized very quickly that I was going to need to be a lot stronger because the expectations of my parenting journey were going to be a lot more intense. It is a lifelong adventure of parenting my son, and he will very likely live with us or close to us for a long time, but his needs are still very physical, and he requires a lot of body support. And now he's almost 6 feet tall. I think, Tony, is he like 6'1"? And a strapping young teen boy who every so often decides he still needs to be carried by mama. And so mama had to get a lot stronger. And when I did anticipate trying to return to sport, found myself really at a loss. The courses and the classes that said that they were for everybody and for everyone weren't. The choreography was too complex. The moves were too hard. I was left feeling inadequate, and I was left feeling alone. And if you're going to feel alone anyway, you might as well be alone on your own terms. And so I went home and I bought a rebounder trampoline, and I walked on my rebounder trampoline. And then 2,000 steps turned into 10, and 10,000 steps turned into stability ball work and bouncing on a stability ball, which turned into walking, which ultimately turned into running, and within a short time frame turned into my first races and my first half ultra triathlon. And I decided to go back to school to hopefully ease the journey that others would have to take if they were also feeling ill-equipped to move their bodies on their own. And that's where I met Tony. Here we are. So I guess I can pass the mic that way.
Yeah, so I was never an athlete. I was always ashamed of my body, likely because I was trans and couldn't really come to terms with that or didn't understand that. There wasn't language around that when I was a kid. And so I was always hiding my body and trying to get out of gym class and that sort of thing. And I always lived in a very large body. What they called me morbidly obese when I was in grade 4 and stayed in that kind of range of weight for many years. I think it was my early 30s that I changed my habits, which the intention was not to change my body, but that's what ended up happening. Yeah, so really not a fan of sports, secretly on the sidelines wishing that I could participate, but not feeling invited, not feeling like I belonged there. Lots of ridicule, lots of bullying in school. And as a result of some pretty complex trauma as a kid, ended up seeking out activities that were high risk. So I did a lot of dirt biking, skydiving, things that gave me that adrenaline burst that a lot of trauma survivors tend to look for. But no sports that really led to me feeling stronger or like my cardio had improved or anything like that. Then went on to have kids like Zita. And one of my kids, my daughter, lovely girl, but from the age of about 18 months up to probably 10 or 11 years old, had a bit of a defiant streak in her and was a bit of a runner. Both of my kids are neurodivergent as well. And I couldn't catch her. She would run off in a parking lot and I couldn't catch her. And so I knew that something had to change. I went about it the completely wrong way. I ended up having very disordered eating patterns and went on to be diagnosed with a binge eating disorder, which was completely out of control at the time. And instead of seeking help because of the amount of shame that had been placed on me and my body size and my behaviors, I tried to do it myself. And I bought a treadmill. And I was probably over 300 pounds at that point and got on that treadmill and ran. And I was crying while I was running, and it hurt and it was awful. And I deprived myself of food. And lo and behold, I lost a whole bunch of weight.
But you weren't able to outrun the shame, and you weren't able to outrun the social expectations, right?
And the funny thing is everybody congratulates you on how great you look, right? In the meantime, you're dying of an eating disorder and shamefully beating your body into submission, and people want to know how you did it. Help me to do it, Tony. That's amazing. You've accomplished so much. And I knew that I couldn't tell them what I had done. I couldn't lead people down that same path. But I wanted to be able to empower people to embrace movement from a different perspective. And so went back to school and took the diploma program for personal fitness trainer at NAIT, and went on to become CSUP certified. Started my own business, and then COVID brought, a couple of factors brought me and Zeta together, but we decided to join forces in COVID and start Action Potential Fitness because we knew we wouldn't survive a pandemic in a fitness role if we didn't at least have someone else to help us through. So that's how we ended up here. And that's my journey.
Wow, thank you for those answers. I love how you both highlighted that activity doesn't necessarily mean sport and how it looks a little bit different for everyone. And as someone who always has been a bit bigger bodied, I really resonated with Zeta, your idea that as a kid, you want to fit into this standard, but you might feel as though you're compelled to gravitate towards volleyball or rugby or more physical sports, but you might enter dance or gymnastics just because you feel that that's what's expected of you. And of course, those are wonderful sports if you want to do them and if you're passionate about doing them. And Zeta, it's also amazing to hear your resilience despite your injury and how your son changed your journey, not at odds with it, but it became a part of it. And I think that's a reminder that fitness journeys are dynamic and they change with you, and that includes your life and kids. And thank you both.
I do want to pause you there just for a second, Erica, if that's okay, though, and I'm glad that Tony raised it and just kind of called out the elephant in the room. Before I came to a healthy place with fitness, I went to a very unhealthy place with fitness. Again, and I think that's the running joke, right? You can't outrun the shame and the trauma of being a larger bodied human and what it means to navigate the world in a body that is fully capable and fully competent, but that has been deemed a problem by society. And so I had many unhealthy patterns. It is not healthy or normal to go from having never run before to doing a half Ironman triathlon in a year. That is not healthy or normal. The amount of training that you need to do to achieve that level of athletic performance. For those who aren't familiar, a half Ironman is 2 kilometer swim followed by a 90-kilometer bike ride followed by a half marathon. And so those are all done consecutively. And they are sports that people train for years to be able to accomplish. And I did years worth of training in 12 months. So I lived with what is now being called by a lot of people anorexia athletica. And so a form of eating disorder that presents as compulsive and disordered exercise. And that was something that I had to really manage when the pandemic happened, because all of a sudden my outlets were gone. I taught 17 hours of group fitness a week, and that was gone, and my body recalibrated as bodies do. And it was very hard to manage the mental health outcomes of that, even as a weight neutral professional.
Yes, thank you so much for your introspection and vulnerability. And you just did an excellent job of highlighting this very important concept that sport can be amazing, but it can also be damaging, and sport does not necessarily mean health. And I'd love to see how you're enacting that concept into your careers. And sorry, that was just a very beautiful conversation and it's making me kind of emotional, but I guess we can move on to the next question now. So, Tony, you already sort of touched upon this, but as a gender diverse individual, did you face any specific challenges when you entered this industry? And how did you navigate them, or what community resources did you use to navigate them?
Well, when I entered the fitness industry, I was identifying as a cisgender lesbian. And so, I had the regular stereotyping that comes with being queer and being under the alphabet soup umbrella. But had I been out as a trans individual, and there was actually a trans individual in my studies with me, I can say from watching their journey that there was a lot of othering. They were treated very differently than a lot of my classmates. They were not valued. They were not seen as capable or smart, even though they were one of the top performers in the class. And so having seen that actually was what led me to go into the area that I went into almost immediately after graduation, which was providing fitness services for trans individuals. And at the time, not even really still on my kind of gender journey of trying to figure out who I was. And people would say, why are you putting so much time into trans people? It just doesn't make sense. And then, a few years later, I actually finally came into myself and recognized that I was a trans individual. But I saw that those trans and queer individuals were being very much treated differently, right? The first queer program that I took over was at a gym space that their heart was in the right place, but they only offered this trans-specific programming after hours when all of the other members had already left, right? So being made to feel like you have to sneak in the back door because you don't want to upset anybody. And I'm not sure that they didn't mindfully do that. That is the effect it had on the participants. But I just knew that something had to change, something had to be done better, so that everybody felt equally welcomed into at least some spaces. We could create some safe spaces where people could be themselves. As an older woman entering into the fitness industry, you have to know that most kids, and I say kids because they were kids to me, but most kids in the NATE personal fitness trainer program ranged somewhere between 17 and 22 years old. And I started when I was 39. So I had a lot of discrimination against me based on my age. At that time, I was in a fairly, what you would consider athletic body frame, so I didn't get any discrimination at that point for that. But I was very much treated like, oh, it's cute. The old lady wants to come in and have a hobby, right? I wasn't treated as seriously as the varsity level athletes that had received a scholarship and were doing the program for other reasons. But yeah, discrimination later on throughout my transition. I think Zita and I can both speak to that a little bit about how people perceive us when we win awards and when we are recognized for our work, and how uncomfortable that is for the fitness industry because we're not supposed to be getting those awards. Because then it looks also like the tokenization, right? Like
it's been implied that any awards or accolades I receive are the result of my intersections as opposed to the result of my hard work. Mm-hmm. Which is a tough pill to swallow when you are really, I think that everyone brings something different to the table. And one of the things that Tony and I bring to the table that's unique is we're very innovative. We are really always looking for ways to transform what exists and expand upon it. And that's often celebrated in multiple areas of business. I was a business manager before I was a business owner. But when you're from an intersection, whether it's race or gender or sexuality, then it gets dismissed as a DEI policy as opposed to a legitimate effort. And I think that's what's so frustrating about what's happening politically right now is that most policies were meant to neutralize that effect. And now we're in a place where we don't have the security and we still have the stigma. And so it's a tough thing to sort of navigate. I am frequently asked, and I mean like frequently asked, why anybody would train with me on the basis of my body size. And to be very clear for those who can't see me because it's an audio recording, I have wavered back and forth through the pandemic. I have had a body that is in excess of 290 pounds, and I've had a body that's been very small. But right now, I have a body size that can buy clothes at any store. So I don't even have right now a body size that we would consider to be larger than average just based on clothing sizes. And even then, that is seen as the tokenized plus size fitness trainer, which gives you an idea of how we see the average body and heaven forbid, the above average body.
Of course, thank you for sharing that. And I guess going back to kind of the policy and the intersection of policy with issues of sports and fitness, how do you both think that cities can actively encourage populations to engage in civic sports, recreation programs, and fitness in a way that is not exclusive and in a way that is actively and intentionally inclusive to groups like seniors, those who are part of the LGBTQ2IAS plus community, larger bodied individuals, neurodivergent individuals?
I think representation is very important, right? Mm-hmm. When you go into a city facility and every lifeguard, every trainer, every staff member is the picture of health, as the fitness industry would say, that fit bodies, hard bodies, beautiful bodies, we can't see ourselves there. So if we can't see ourselves there, we wouldn't want to put ourselves there. We wouldn't want to be the token fat person in the room or the token trans person in the room. Also, messaging on advertising websites, things like that. They don't even think about putting up photos of gender or racially diverse people or different sized bodies. It's always the picture of health and fitness. Things like intake forms, having the option of putting different pronouns or a chosen name that differs from your legal name to indicate that they're trans-friendly and queer-friendly. There's so many different ways that they could change, and I have in the past actually tried to work with the city of Edmonton, which went nowhere. Maybe the representative that they put me in touch with was just not interested in doing anything to change, but they kind of blew a lot of hot air up our skirts and made us feel like we were going to make a change, and then nothing at all changed. Right?
In fairness, this was, we were 7 years ago, Tony, that we're talking in terms of that stuff.
Yeah.
So it's dated, but it's hard because you try to make change and are met with a lot of words, but not always translating to action, which is such a struggle in municipal politics, right? Like it's so many different layers of administrative effort go into evoking any change.
So I just don't go to places anymore. I used to swim on a very regular basis. So those sorts of things, and I'm sure that the same things exist for other marginalized demographics where they just don't feel like these places are set up for them.
I echo everything that Tony is sharing, and I think that one of the parts of the conversation that seems to have gotten a little bit lost, and in sports and fitness, but in inclusion in general, is we jump right to the policy and we jump right to the actions. But I sometimes worry if we don't need to take a bit of a retrospective step back and insert ourselves into the empathetic experience. Right? And so, for example, I think of, and this touches on gender a little bit, but it intersects with disability as well. With both of my children having disabilities, but one having very pronounced disabilities, we swim frequently because water is so regulating. And one of our favorite facilities to swim at is Twilliger. And it's a two-person job having two kids like mine. And so for a very long time, especially when they were younger, we needed both parents. And we needed both parents to be able to be with both kids so that changing experience could be safe for everyone. And even having to go and ask for a code, right? And going to the desk and saying, we need to have access to the disability change room. And then having my body challenge, like, we really only reserve that for disabled people. I'm like, I hear that. My son is actually in the change room, and I'm sure that he meets your qualifications. Right? But the things that we haven't investigated from the lens and perspective of the people we're trying to help. And so a lot of the time we talk about spaces and about forms, and I think what Tony and I have tried to do that's a little bit different is talk about people, right? What is your experience? What do you need to feel safe and seen in this moment? And what can we do in this moment to show you that we are invested? And it doesn't mean we get it right all the time, right? One of the things that our team is actively working on is recognizing that we are very, very white-centric. Our facility is very white-centric. Fitness in general is very white-centric. And we have some real work to do to decolonize our practice, to think about why that is, and how we can actively create the space that feels comfortable and accessible to people. But we can't do that from our lens because we don't understand the problem. We can put all kinds of images on social media. we can tell people that we are working on decolonization and on really actively trying to amend our internalized privileges and address the racial inequity. But we don't live within the intersection. And so the most important first step to that is broadening our team, broadening our focus group, bringing the community in and saying, we don't know what you know. And no amount of policy is going to tell us that. We can't draft policy without your input.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that maybe we've come a long way in DEI work. We've come a long way in inclusion in general. But I think that we thought that we could just check that step as if it was done. To be like, yeah, no, we've done the consultation. It was taken care of in the 80s, and now we can move forward. But if we look at something like even Truth and Reconciliation, there's a reason that few of these actions have turned into reality, right? They were driven in large part by members of the community sharing their experiences, but then having those experiences filtered through the application of people who didn't live them, right? So in municipal politics, having conversations and looking around the room, and the most important question for me is, who isn't here? Who are we missing at the table? And why?
Thank you so much for highlighting the importance of representation in inclusion and diversity, and highlighting that it's not just policy that has to change, but it's within our personal interactions. It's so complex and it's such a growing, moving, changing part. So thank you for highlighting that. So coming back to you, Zita, the fitness industry often promotes certain standards around appearance or performance. How do you approach these standards in your work, and how do you create spaces that are more inclusive for all body types, genders, and abilities in your practice specifically?
That's, what a great question. What a big question. And so I'm going to focus more on I'm going to leave to you, Tony, the conversation on gender, in terms of gender, diversity. So that we can talk kind of more specifically on the area that I work in, which is body image and how that intersects. I think that when we are thinking about body and the role of body in society, almost every system of oppression, I know that that's language that may rub some people the wrong way, but this is my undergrad in sociology showing up. When we think about people who are harmed on the basis of being different, so whatever language you want to give to that, but harmed on the basis of being different than the majority group, the body is at the epicenter of almost all of it. Age, sexuality, gender, disability. The body has been very targeted. And sport, since it's incarceration, right? If you look back historically at the Olympics, sport has always been about highlighting the potential of human possibility, right? And what a beautiful idea, the potential of human possibility, of what we can achieve. And trying to translate that into recreation is complex. I'm not sure we fully nailed it. And so we had a much more active life beforehand, but I think that there's a bridging between performance and just living as an embodied life, and what it means to exist in a body that is active by virtue of being alive. And so these are really artificial constructs. I tell people a lot where I'm like, it's, in many ways, sports is absurd. Exercise is absurd when you think about it. Pick up this heavy thing, stand up, sit down, 10 times and put it down. Wait 30 seconds, do it again. Right? Like it's an absurdity when you think about our species and the potential for self-actualization, that this is actually how we've conceptualized a movement. That movement has come down to pick up heavy thing just because you can. And I think that feels difficult for people to incorporate into their lives. I think it feels inane in some ways to think about exercise as being this additional thing that they have to move in and find space for in their world, when there is the only outcome is to change how the body feels and what it can do and how it looks. And then we so heavily emphasize how it looks that the very little sliver that we could have of if you're stronger, you will have a better life outside of the gym kind of disappears. Because we're so focused on, if you do this, you will have a better, more attractive body that will make you less stigmatized outside of the gym. And the problem is, it's a lie. And it's a lie that we've been perpetuating for a very, very long time, right? Research tells us, and I'm happy to send this to you, Erica, to toss some comments if you want, but research tells us that losing weight does not make you happier. And unfortunately, research tells us that losing weight doesn't even particularly change how other people in your immediate circle perceive you. They will always remember the fat bodied you. And then we're surprised when people cycle. Right? As opposed to sitting there and going, if you move your body from a place of enjoying the simple fact of being alive, and that movement is how your body processes information and stress, and movement is how you regain strength to do the things that motivate and inspire you, because our time here is short. If Tony and I do our job well, we say this to all of our clients coming in, if we do our job well, we work ourselves out of a job. Because our goal isn't to train you. Our goal is to equip you with the skills and the confidence and the love and inspiration you need to live an active life that extends far beyond the gym. And it doesn't mean you won't still come and hang out with us. A lot of them do. They say, but they don't need us. Not anymore.
Wow, thank you for that answer. So now moving over to you, Tony, maybe you can touch more on the gender aspect of it, or whatever aspects you feel are most applicable to you, about how you approach standards in your work, as in standards surrounding appearance and performance, and how you create spaces for these differences and such in your practice.
A lot of the work that we do here are specialized programs for different intersections of marginalization. For instance, one of the first programs that we launched was Fitness Transformed, which is a big billboard message. You are welcome here. In fact, this is created for just you, right? This is a safe space. It is exclusively trans. Everybody on the team that is teaching you is trans. So this is your home too. And we didn't think we'd get very many people out, because trans people are very slow to trust and have been taken advantage of and harmed many, many times. But I don't think it was more than 24 hours after we put it up on our social media that we had 30 people apply for this program. We were hoping we might get 10. And so it was overwhelming. And when we got feedback from those participants about what led them to us, it was very much that we created a space that they knew wasn't just tolerant of them, but was made for them. Right? We did the same thing with a program called Fat Fit Fearless, which is meant for radical celebration of fat bodies or bodies of any shape. Right? And so they're not welcoming fat bodies into a group fitness class that's going to make them feel completely othered or like they don't fit in. Everybody in that class perceives their body as a fat body. Right? And they have space to talk about the social injustices that people live when they live in fat bodies in our society. And they move their bodies joyfully. And so we also have a program called Diversifit, which is for neurodivergent folks and their caregivers. Right? So we were creating spaces to say, you don't just have to go and hope that they're going to tolerate you somewhere. You get to go somewhere that is designed for you. And we don't segregate people to those groups. We have trans individuals that attend all of our other classes. Our folks from Fat Fit Fearless come to our other classes, and we all come together in this beautiful way to celebrate the fact that we're kind of all the misfits. Right? We're the misfits from society that feel like going into those other spaces is too scary, too intimidating. They're going to push weight loss on us. I remember walking into a gym 20 years ago. That's dating me a lot, but and being asked, before the girl even introduced herself to me, asking, how much weight do you want to lose? Right? So to have a weight neutral facility like ours, where we actually have a policy, we are weight neutral. Unless somebody privately asks us about weight loss, we don't discuss it here. Right? we will help people with aesthetic goals, especially our trans and gender fluid people, because those kind of changes can be life-saving. If we can help somebody to reduce the appearance of their hips or to, masculinize or feminize a body, those things are life-saving, but we typically don't ever advertise those services. You're not expected to be anything or want any particular goal when you come here. You just get to come and radically celebrate movement and find joy in moving your body, right? Where there's no expectations in classes. We have a policy that if any exercise feels like it's not right for your body, you put your hand up and we'll find a different exercise. And that might be because it makes you self-conscious of your belly jiggling when you do high knees, or because, you feel like a certain exercise is feminizing and you don't really want to do that. Whatever the reason is, we adapt to everybody in our space, and everybody gets the same amount of respect and acceptance, regardless of any of their intersections here. And I think that's what makes this a magical place for a lot of people.
I think a lot of it comes down to, and Tony, you touched on it, we don't presume people's goals. Yeah. Right? Like, it's every individual is a unique human being, and we all have very unique journeys in our body. And it's not our place to judge or ascribe to someone what they should be doing or not doing with their body. But we don't presume that there's only one way to body. And I think just going back to talking more about the sports issue and tying in sports into that in general, it's disheartening because we really do as a society still struggle to embrace that women are powerful and strong and athletic and competent and capable. And that messaging has been increased. It's really lovely to see a broader messaging of femininity as powerful, but it has come at the expense of body diversity. And I would actually suggest that it's come at the expense of diversity on every level, that we're now playing catch up, and that we have really elevated the position of thin, strong, muscular, white woman of a certain age, that age being under 30, and done so in a way that really has abandoned women and gender diverse humans overall, right? And so it's easy to allow those messages to creep in. But moving our body is something that should be a birthright. Like, it's literally, if Maslow, like, part of the reason why Maslow's hierarchy doesn't talk about movement is because, and I swear if I could have a conversation with him, he would back me up on this. I would lay my life down. He could not conceptualize a world where we didn't have to walk. Because of when he was doing his writing, which was before the major revolution of the auto industry and before the 1950s really changed how we do work and the rise of marketing. I don't think Maslow could conceive of a world where we were not physically active because the world demanded it of us. Right? Our transportation, for the most part, was feet. Right? And they got us real far. And even horse riding, there's a certain amount of athleticism that goes into that. And it's not to say that everyone was stronger, it's to say that everyone moved. Movement was essential. And so when he highlights sex and food and sleep and drinking, if somebody had said, and also like movement, right, like physical activity, because your organs stop working if you don't move, he'd be like, yeah, that was implied. Like, that's how absurd I think the idea of centrism would have been to someone like us. And yet now it's our norm.
Thank you. I'd love to see your sociology background coming in a bit there with NASA. I know that's more psychology, but, intersections here. It's amazing to see the response you've been getting in the very intentional programs you're creating. And again, the positive responses you've been getting, I think, are indications that you're doing something right. And it's really lovely to see the diverse populations you serve and the expertise you have behind these perspectives. So our last question for today's episode will be, what role does community and having access to community resources play in the success of your work? So, Tony, I'll start with you.
Community is everything. Without them, we would be nothing. So, I think it's been a very, very heartwarming and fulfilling journey to have offered services, hoping that they might actually come, and now being surrounded by all of these wonderful human beings that are just so grateful to have a place where they can come and just be. And so it's wonderful. Accessing community resources, we have partnered with a lot of different nonprofits and associations in the city to stop trying to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of people trying to do the same thing in the city. And so a lot of us have come together and started to recognize that, they have a youth program out of the Pride Center, and we're going to be starting a youth trans fitness program. And so why don't we get together and see if we can put all our heads together. And in terms of them also making space available for us to come out and do workshops and things like that has been really great. Anything you'd like to add on that, Zita?
Yeah, I'm going to touch on something we didn't really talk about a whole lot, but is a really big part of how we do things and why I think they're maybe so different. We take a very whole person health approach. And so and we mean that very literally, right? The understanding that a person's entire life context influences their ability to engage with sport, with recreation, with anything, really. In my kind of parallel life of psychology, we talk a lot about the mind-body connection, and that's a really hot catchphrase right now, right? The importance of recognizing that the mind and body are one synergistic unit. But I've often said that there's a missing and. And what I mean by that is it's not just mind-body connection. It's mind-body and connection. It's actually that there's a third piece to this equation that is integral to the healing of both physical and mental self. We're not intended to exist or heal or grow or expand as individuals. We are designed on a neurological level, on a scientific DNA level, to respond to each other's energies and to be motivated and secure and safe in the existence of community. And that missing and is so important because it shifts responsibility away from the individual and that very hyper-individualistic idea of your health is your responsibility, and it expands it far beyond your health is a government budget item, and that's the responsibility of the government, and expands it to we are all responsible for the health of those around us, that we play an active living role in how others around us move through this world. It's really a phenomenal thing to see. And I imagine it's funny because people assume when we talk about marginalization, depression, all these fun sociology terms that are also hot right now. But we actually have a very politically neutral space. We have people of all walks of life, of all political orientations, of all ages. And when they walk through the doors, none of that matters. And it doesn't matter because we're meeting each other in humanity, not in ideology. Right? And the shared experience of everyone in the facility is that we are walking in as human beings who recognize that we are stronger together, that we are healthier when we are in community and concert with each other, and that healing and growth is a collective experience. And I think that that's a very different way of approaching it. One of the things that really altered, and I'll speak for you, Tony, but I think that it speaks to both of us, that led to the formation of our trauma-informed framework was this epiphanous realization, and we hear it said all the time, but it really hit us one day, that stress is stress regardless of the source. Okay, so the body is impacted by stress on a physical level, regardless of where that stress is coming from. Psychologically and emotionally, stress is experienced differently. But on a physical level, in terms of what your body has to do to manage that stress and process it and release it, it doesn't really matter what the source is. And that means that the environment in which we engage in stress is everything. Right? And exercise, whether we like it or not, is stress. It's intentional stress. It's stress that's being used to help us process stress. But in order to, kind of like chemotherapy, You take a poison in order to get the poison out of your body, right? And so you need to be exposed to the stress to acclimate your body to be able to better process it. And that's what we call stress inoculation. And that's very much what Tony and I do, on a deeper framework level. But this idea that your environment determines whether or not fast heart rate, being out of breath, tense muscles, the heightened state of readiness is escaping a predator or excitement and play. And it's the others around us that give us the clues that tip our system into knowing which one is which. So for a lot of people, going for a run feels like death literally, like literally. It's the same physical experience as being hunted. But when you're dancing at a club or celebrating your best friend's wedding and kicking it off for 6 hours straight and going, I can't believe how hard I danced last night, you still had that experience. But the environment and social culture altered how it felt. And all of a sudden, that same heart rate went from being scary and awful and dreadful to exhilarating and fun and rejuvenating. So that's the role and power of community.
That is such a beautiful way to put it. I mean, the people around you, they shape who you are, they change your experience, and it's no different for fitness. I mean, I definitely relate to the feeling like dying when you run. So sometimes I also feel like dying when I'm dancing, but the community makes it a little bit better. So being more specific to Edmonton, how do Edmonton's unique culture, values, or identity influence your philosophy and approach at Action Potential Fitness? And what does it mean to you to operate a fitness business in the city specifically? How would it be different than if you were to operate one in, let's say, Calgary? So Zita, we can go back to you again.
That's such a great question. And it's funny because it's one of those things we don't think about on the outside very often, but it's actually a really, really big deal. Edmonton is vibrant. This is a city that overwhelmingly actually really loves where we live, right? And we are a dynamic community of really innovative thinkers. We have this beautiful, beautiful outdoor landscape that we can celebrate. But we're also creative. Like, we have people coming into us from all areas of the city, because one of the strengths of Edmonton, I know that we don't have the public transit that we would love to see expanded on. I know the city's doing great work in terms of that. But we hug the Yellowhead. We are minutes away from the Henday and the White Mud. We are right off of 107th Avenue. And so the ability to come to the extreme west, because we are as far west as you can really get in the West Industrial, is made possible by the city's layout, and it's part of why it's so important to think about things like sprawl. But I will also say the city, with tipping my hat and deep deference to our municipal leaders, boy, y'all made it easy for us by not giving us a rec center in the West End. Every block you walk down in Edmonton, like in our little area, I think there's 6 different gyms in like a 4-block vicinity, because the nearest recreation center to us is Kinsman, right? And we've been talking about the farms for a really long time, but as the community in Edmonton has expanded and has really broadened, and we see young families popping up in these new housing areas, we simply haven't provided them the recreational options that they need. Right? It really shouldn't take the amount of effort and driving right off the get-go to get to a recreation center that should be the heartbeat of a city and community. Right? And so the YMCA over in, just on the other side of the White Mud, at Jamie Class, offers some of that community recreation feel. But in many ways, recreation centers are the city's beating hearts. And especially in a winter city where our options become limited, whether we like it or not, biopsychosocial isn't enough. Okay? There's also cultural and environmental. That's a thing. And so when we're putting out social media posts going, okay, so air quality advisory says please don't run today. I know you really want to run today. It's a terrible idea to run today. It will harm your health unless you are wearing a pollution filtration mask. And when you don't have options, or when it's minus 40 and you don't have options, that indoor facility becomes the the circuitry that connects all of our communities together. And I think that the West End is eager to create and feel that same sense of cohesion that we see in other areas that have those centers to gather around. Mm-hmm. But in the absence of that, they've turned to places like us. You can't even walk in our area because there are no sidewalks. So for people to walk from their bus stop to get to our gym, they must walk in the street. And let me tell you, as a parent with 2 young children, not loving that. Not loving that. Dip Abilities, wonderful organization just a few doors down from us, when they take their group of adults and children with disabilities out for walks, literally are walking through the parking lots of the buildings because the alternative is walking in the street, right? And so there's this big idea that the West Industrial is still industrial, but we've got retail and restaurants and things popping up without the infrastructure to support it. And so I know that our councillor, Andrew Knack, has done some incredible work advocating for that change over the last several years. I'm eager to see what that will look like when he leaves council. He's been a tremendous voice for the West End. But in terms of urban planning, yeah, you guys made it easy on us.
Thank you so much for your perspective and for highlighting the importance of accessibility of recreation centers and how important they are for community identity and really that heartbeat of the community that you referenced. So what do you think, Tony, about how Edmonton's unique culture, values, and identity influences your philosophy and approach at Action Potential Fitness, and again, what it means to operate a fitness business in this city?
Well, I always kind of try to take inventory of what areas of our country are most hospitable to groups of marginalized populations. And as much as I love the city that we live in, we are not as forward thinking about those things as, say, the other major centers of Vancouver and Toronto areas. And so I think it makes it that much more important for us to make sure that we have these kind of specialized services in this city because there's nobody else doing it. Right? Calgary has a great gym that is very similar to ours, called Everybody Stronger. There's one that I think just popped up in Vancouver. But the bigger centers definitely have more options, and people are not, I wouldn't say, as at risk in going to the mainstream fitness centers. We've got a lot of growth to do in the city, and the recent political stuff going on is certainly not helping with that. And so, yeah, lots of great things to say about this city, but also increasingly dangerous for certain populations to try to access services. And I think that has really definitely shaped the direction that we have gone because we weren't always a specialty boutique. We were kind of a gen pop, focused more on size inclusivity. But we've gone kind of down the rabbit hole the other ways as we start to notice a need for it and a lack of services. So yeah, I think it has really shaped and informed our practice and how we want to do things in our center.
If I can just build on that really quickly. The ultimate question, Erica, comes down to, does every human being have the right to human? Right? And so even beyond, as opposed to breaking it down to categories, does every human being have the right to human? And if we acknowledge that every human being has the right to human, the question is, what do you need to be able to feel human? It's inhumane to ask someone to participate in a class that hasn't thought about whether or not their body fits into the exercise equipment. That is inhumane. It is inhumane to ask people to join a facility that doesn't have an option for them to go to the washroom. That's inhumane. And a lot of this really comes down to, what do we need to do in order for every human to feel like they can live as humans in our shared spaces? And whether individuals want to acknowledge it or not, the simple fact of the matter is our intersections are also taxpayers, right? So we really shouldn't be asking or begging permission to be accessing the facilities that are subsidized and funded by people of all diversities and all backgrounds. So we just ask, what do you need to human today? And it's our job to make humaning possible. People need to move to be human. That is a need that they have. So what needs to happen to make human movement possible for all human beings?
Thank you for sharing. I love to see that you're fulfilling the needs you see exist in the city, and we are so grateful to have heard your voices and your perspectives today. So thank you so much for that.
Can I just ask one question? Can I offer something?
Of course.
And I'm actually going to toss it to Tony. Tony, I want to ask you a question because I know that you will speak to this much better than I could. What is the role of education and the staffing and the personnel of facilities in sport and recreation? Right? Because that's been a big focus of interest for you, is making sure that the professionals know how to do the things that need to happen. And so,
I mean, there are so many considerations to be made for each intersection of martialization. We have wonderful trainers out there, but there's not a lot of education around trauma-informed fitness, about what to look for if somebody is having a trigger trauma response, about the physiological considerations for people that are taking gender-affirming hormones or having gender-affirming surgeries pre- and post-op. There's not a lot of education in how to modify exercises for bigger bodies.
Or even menopause, right? Like, we're talking about 50% of the population is going to hit this. It's going to happen. It's a thing. Yeah. And just don't talk about it.
No. And there's very little education in our program. There was a course on special physiological considerations, but you would do like 2 pages about diabetes and maybe a mention of fibromyalgia, maybe a slight mention of arthritis. And then the associations come after us and say, if anybody has more than 2 of these health considerations, you can't train them.
Mm-hmm. That used to be the norm.
Where are they supposed to go? Right? So I do believe that in the fitness industry, hopefully we're going to see a movement towards increasing the education about the specialized populations. Right? If we were to bring trans individuals in here that are taking gender-affirming hormone therapy and not understand, for instance, that muscle grows far faster than connective tissue in the presence of testosterone, and we just went all out and trained them, we would be rupturing muscles left, right, and center. If we didn't know that they cannot thermoregulate, our trans women are constantly cold and our trans men are constantly overheating. So our environment needs to be such that it is safe for them to exercise. And they don't teach you that in school.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They don't teach you how to slowly, very slowly, progressively overload somebody with fibromyalgia so we can start to change the pain signals in the body rather than just saying, you got to move more. Just go move.
Right. And just because when you said, right, like you said that there are so many intersections, no one's going to be an expert on all these things. No one can be an expert on all these things. That's unrealistic. But you can be an expert on your client.
Yeah.
And that's where that question of what do you need to human? What needs to happen for this to be the most accessible experience for you as a user, as an individual, and really asking people on a personal level, what are we missing?
That was it brought to light things that I had never even thought of before. I was worried when I first started moderating this episode that, I would have trouble doing it because I'm literally the most unathletic person they could have possibly chosen. But unfortunately, there's such a relatability to all of these problems and systemic issues that you brought up. So I just wanted to say, again, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives. Inclusion is always evolving, norms are always changing, and you are an incredible part of that change, I think. So this was an incredible conversation, and I think it ultimately shows that when it comes to health and wellness, diversity is strength. And if you're looking to keep the momentum going, stay tuned for our next episode where we tackle challenges and opportunities in the legal field. Until then, keep pushing boundaries and breaking stereotypes, because equity is always in motion.